morning, everybody. It's very much quieter now than it was a few minutes ago, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. So I'll plough on and we'll be quick. I'm not sure whether this mouse is working. We'll try. No. Okay, that's not bad. So when we talk about innovating in the food industry, we can be talking clearly about a myriad of different things. We can be discussing different food intake trackers, that people now, wearable items that people wear. We could be talking about colour changing or different types of packaging, different ways of selling food products, different ways of using ingredients and generating food products that reach the marketplace. Clearly there's a myriad of hundreds and millions and thousands of types of food innovation that we could be talking about. But what I'm going to be discussing today is none of those. I'm going to be talking about the regulation of food, functional food, so it's functional ingredients, and we talk about innovation. That's really the area in which I want to talk to you today. These images are all samples and examples of what we know on the marketplace to be functional foodstuffs. But really, what is a functional food? It's one that contains a specific physiologically active component that provides health and well-being beyond basic nutrition. And by that, I suppose we mean that that a functional food is a product that we buy off the shelf in which there's a special ingredient that does something that normal foodstuffs don't do. It's something that's biologically active. We consume it and it does something that's beneficial for our health. And the global market for functional foods is estimated to be approximately $80 billion with a growth rate of 8%. So this is a very big marketplace that's expanding and growing all the time. The Irish functional food sector is worth in excess of €100 million, and where we fit in, and I'll talk to you briefly about what Food for Health Ireland is, and the organisation that I work with. We're based in UCD. So what is FHI? I know you were here this morning and you heard Jens speaking. He's the CEO of FHI. But he didn't really tell you who we were in too much detail, so I'm going to briefly explain what it is that we do. FHI is a partnership between the public research organisations and the Irish food industry. So the work is conducted across all the PROs virtually in the country. I mean, what a PRO is, I mean, essentially the universities and Teagasc are all involved in conducting the research, with the exception of Trinity College Dublin, but all the other academic institutions and Teagasc are involved in conducting the research. We are funded by what we say by the Irish food industry, principally by Enterprise Ireland and also by the 5 bigger dairy companies in the country. So by that I mean, I suppose we're talking Glanbia, Carberry, Kerry Foods, the Irish Dairy Board, which is now Ornua, and Dairy Gold. And they've all come together to co-fund the creation of the organisation known as FHI. We're an industry-led research agenda is what we have, so it's not purely academic. While the work is conducted by the academics in their research laboratories, it is industry-driven and obviously it's industry-funded, but the idea is that we're not just in a sort of a lab hidden away in an ivory tower, that this is industry driven, that this is going to marketplace, essentially at the end of the day what we're trying to generate is something that will add value to Irish dairy, but will we reach the marketplace and will be successful. So it's one centre. As I said, the HQ is currently it's in, well, at the moment and hopefully for the foreseeable, it's in UCD. But we are one centre that's aimed at developing manufacturing and the marketing of selling functional food products, the principal component of which obviously is milk. These, as I mentioned, are the PROs and everybody's involved in conducting. So we identified the areas of expertise in each university. Rather than duplicating and replicating what's done in any one, we tried and isolated where the expertise was so we could circulate it and distribute the workload in a sense. And so FHI, we see ourselves as the gateway to world-class academic research. So we manage the programme, we meet industry standards, and we also conduct a reasonably large chunk of contract research, of which we can talk about any time you wanted to. But what I was asked to do today was apart from explaining who FHI are, was to talk about the regulation of health claims and functional foods, because it's functional, as I said, functional food is the key area that I'm interested in. And specifically, what does that mean in terms of, so you want to innovate and you want to generate a new ingredient with this biologically active component. What are the regulatory hurdles and where does it make it difficult for you? And the regulation of health claims, there's a specific regulation involved. But some key trends that are driving this market in terms of functional food market is that we have an ageing population worldwide, and by the end of this year it's anticipated that the EU will have twice as many 55 to 75 year olds as we have 15 to 24 year olds. So the market is changing and moving, and not only are people getting older and people want to live longer, they want to live longer and be healthy. And that's an area of particular interest to the work that we do in FHI. Specifically, a firm-funded study that we were involved with in FHI was funded by firm, conducted in UCD, identified that older people found health claims on cheese particularly, but we can talk about widening that to a broader audience, that health claims on cheese were more credible and they were more willing to purchase cheese with a health claim than younger people were. So health claims have an impact. That's, I suppose, the message we can take from that the presence of a health claim on a foodstuff will have an impact on people's willingness to purchase. But what does that mean in terms of, who are EFSA? We talk about, and I'll explain in more detail who EFSA are in terms of what they do. But they have set standards and created regulatory environments whereby there are special rules as to what we can say and what we cannot say. So it's no longer possible to use the term probiotic. We can no longer stick the term antioxidant on our foodstuffs. They're prohibited. So you have to be creative. In some ways, certainly with the term probiotic, I think in some ways it's fair to say a very good message has been communicated already. So there is a very high degree of understanding amongst the general public as to what a probiotic is. So in a sense, the horse has bolted there. But in some of the other terms that have now been prohibited by EFSA, there's an inherent health claim in them, and that's why they've been prohibited to use. So they've, in creating that establishment, EFSA have demanded an improvement in our level of creativity in terms of what we can say and how we go about doing it. And also in terms of key trends, it's fair to say that where fat used to be the devil and the demon, it seems that sugar has taken over as being the devil or the demon. So that's, in terms of diabetes, there's a huge, there's an increase in the incidence of diabetes worldwide, globally. And this gives us, in a way, you could say, an opportunity to look at the food supply. And that's something in terms of glycemic management, again, that FHI is particularly interested in. And another area that we focused on is sports nutrition. The demand increase, it never ceases to amaze me that the increase in demand for sports nutrition is rising and keeps rising and keeps rising. And you think, surely we've reached a peak of this. We're all sick of hearing about protein. We're done to death with protein shakes and these nutrition shops. But no, it keeps rising and it keeps improving and getting bigger and bigger all the time. And that's another area that FHI are expressing an interest in our research. So back to the regulation. The key regulatory piece in terms of nutrition and health claims is Regulation 1924. It was published in 2006. There is a strict process under this regulation that the food industry must comply with in order to make a food health claim. You need a positive opinion from EFSA in order to make a claim. As I said, we all know now, we've heard this story many times before, that you can't just say what you want on pack. You have now, if you want to say that this product is good for your heart, if you want to say this will reduce your cholesterol, if you want to say this will help manage your blood sugars in a better way, you need approval. And you get that approval from EFSA. EFSA have 3 specific questions that they ask. Is the food sufficiently characterized? Is the claimed effect beneficial for health? And is a cause and effect relationship established between the consumption of the food and the claimed effect? And if you don't get a yes to all 3 of those questions, then you will get a no. So you must answer positively for all 3 of those. The first question, is the food sufficiently characterized? What they really want you to say is to explain what your ingredient is. You're putting this biologically active component into your foodstuff to generate a functional food, but what is it? Do you really, really, really understand the devil and the detail of what that functional component is? And if so, then you can move on to the next question. But if you haven't satisfactorily answered that question, EFSA don't even consider the rest of your dossier. They don't even consider the rest of the information that you have supplied to them. So number 1 is to get that answer right. Is the claimed effect beneficial for health? That's something that you would think would be self-obvious, but it's not sometimes. So you have to be careful that sometimes you think that something is good for health, maybe good for an individual's health, but it may not be a good public health message to deliver. So that's something else that you need to consider. And thirdly, and this is really the biggest hurdle, this is the one that causes the most trouble, is a cause and effect relationship established? In other words, have you demonstrated satisfactorily with all of the science that you've conducted, have you demonstrated that it does what it says on the tin? And that's really the biggest hurdle that people have to climb. But these are, if you want to innovate in the functional food space, these are these 3 questions that you really need to ask and have satisfactorily answered. So we say that, but who and what are EFSA? Who gives them the power to be who they are and to say what they do? EFSA is the European Food Safety Authority, and it provides independent scientific advice on emerging risks in the food supply. The scientific advice is independent of industry, not independent of regulators, incidentally, independent of industry. So there are no industry, and if you were involved in any sort of industry research panels and you're involved in EFSA, then you must declare them. The scientific advice is supplied by panels from scientists across the European Union. This morning, if you remember, you had Dr. Wayne Anderson from the Food Safety Authority. He was speaking to us this morning, and he, for example, is on one of those panels. So we'd have a number of scientists in Ireland. Some of them come from academia, some of them come from the regulatory agencies, and they represent Ireland on, or not, they represent themselves in terms of their scientific expertise on these individual panels. Almost all of the scientific panels, of which there are 22 in EFSA, and almost all of them were established to address the concept of safety and to ensure that the foods that we consume are safe to eat. But there was one exception to that, and that is the panel on dietetic products, nutrition and allergies, the NDA panel. And that was established for slightly different reasons, certainly in terms of health claims, which was to ensure that the information that's supplied in a health claim can be substantiated. Again, as I said, the key is to demonstrate that it does what it says on the tin. So it's not necessarily, obviously safety has to be a feature, but the key issue to be addressed by the NDA panel in terms of health claims is, can it do what you're claiming that it does? And that's their biggest question. There are three separate opinions. They have the 3 categories rather. There's Article 13.1, which are generic claims. For example, calcium is good for your bones. That's a universal, what they call a generic health claim. Article 13.5 are those based on newly developed scientific evidence, and that's where when we hear the discussion nowadays, if you like, for what we can, for the health claims that are approved or not approved, they tend to fall under an Article 13.5 category. And Article 14 are those that are targeted at children or specific disease risk reduction claims. So if you want to say this product will reduce your risk of developing diabetes, for example, it would fall under that category. The opinions are published by EFSA. So EFSA will give a positive or a negative opinion. As I've explained, they look at those 3 questions and they'll give you a positive or a negative. But it's only an opinion. The final ruling is made by the European Commission. So they would take on board the EFSA opinion, but they don't always support it, they don't always agree with them. 99% of the time that they do, but sometimes they don't. The key thing is a suitably designed intervention trial. I think we've successfully, when all this kicked off in 2007, we still talked about clinical trials, and all the industry was talking about the concept of a clinical trial. But really, clinical trials are a really sort of medicinal term that HIPAA, the IMB, and it's what the pharmaceutical industry are involved in is clinical trials. I think it's realistic to say that what we're involved in the food industry is not a clinical trial, it's an intervention trial. We don't have phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. We don't have those same hurdles that they do, but in the pharmaceutical industry. But it makes it very challenging because it's not, the notion of an intervention trial is not something that the food industry is familiar with at all. So it's very new for us to be dealing with that in that area. As I've said already, we need to characterise the ingredient properly, and we need to demonstrate that it generates a beneficial physiological effect. While the second 2 questions there may be relatively easy to demonstrate, the first one is an extraordinarily difficult challenge for the food industry. It's not something that your average yogurt manufacturer has ever done before or is ever in a position to do realistically. It's something that we've been involved in FHI for the last number of years, but it's not something that an average food industry that doesn't have access to that sort of academic scientific expertise is routinely going to be in a position to do. They are very expensive things to do to conduct an intervention trial. So the alternative, as I see it, for lots of the Irish, certainly the SME sector in the Irish food industry, is to use these Article 13.1 claims that are already approved. So what's the future? I'll flick through this. The demand is on the rise. We need to generate the science for an Article 13.5 health claim, but it's expensive and time consuming. The opportunity does exist to do collaborative research with FHI. So while we have our industry partners, our 5 specific industry partners, we are certainly open to the notion of doing contract research with any food company who's interested in exploring possibilities, whether it's intervention work or other sorts of analysis. We're certainly open to that idea in FHI. And there are other areas and other parts of the world and other markets, for example, the States or China, where you can make claims that we can't make here in the European Union. And while perhaps we should be exploring those as possibilities to export our foodstuffs and to make it easier. So thank you very much.